Calling this generation soft or weak because they're actually quitting toxic jobs was always hilarious to me. How exactly is staying and licking your boss's boots every day for the rest of your life a show of courage? Exactly. Self-respect and dignity are incredibly strong human emotions, perhaps even the strongest human emotions. Oftentimes, people would rather die than be humiliated and have their dignity stripped from them. But it's really interesting that we make an exception for all of this without second thought when it comes to anything work-related. If your partner verbally abused you the way your boss does, society would instantly tell you to get out of that toxic relationship. When people can't afford to pay rent or groceries, we say tough luck, it's your own fault. But when companies can't afford to pay minimum wage, which is a necessary business expense that they signed up for, suddenly everybody rushes to justify and rationalize why they should be allowed to pay even less than the horseshit wages they're already paying. Why do we give corporations a free pass for all this horrible, abusive behavior that we would never, ever allow normal people to get away with? Well, as you'll soon see, the main reason is because older generations were a bunch of corporate simps with absolutely zero self-respect. Gen Z, however, is changing the game. Part 1, the great corporate simp lie. I've argued with a bunch of corporate simps in my time on YouTube, and one thing I've noticed is that their entire philosophical dogma behind why they think we should all be forced to work revolves around one single faulty pillar of logic. The idea that human life is inherently worthless and society doesn't owe us anything. Because if human life has inherent value, then the idea that we should have to constantly ass kiss, bootlick, and suck up to these narcissist, power-tripping bosses and managers just so we can live is complete insanity. Only if your life is inherently worthless does it make sense that you should have to subject yourself to this level of self-degradation just to prove you're worthy of living. However, if we can prove that human life indeed has inherent value and society does in fact owe us, then their whole argument falls apart because, again, their entire economic philosophy hinges on this one faulty belief. Part 2, human life does have inherent value and society does owe us. Being unemployed is, needless to say, a very controversial and heated topic. The main reason people have a problem with this is because supposedly you're living off the work of others. But there is one and only one very, very interesting exception to this. Through my over 200 videos and countless hours of engaging and arguing with corporate simps in the comments, there seems to be one scenario in which everyone, even corporate simps themselves, agree that it's acceptable to be unemployed. And that is if you have rich parents. Generally, if someone has rich parents, doesn't work, and just lives off their family trust fund, we don't consider that wrong or immoral on a macro societal level. Sure, we may look down on them on a personal level for being a nepo baby and not earning their success, but we generally don't view them as being a burden to society. Why? Well, quite simply because people generally think that it's okay to live off the work of your ancestors, but not of other people. So let's just take this logic and use it. Remember, this is their logic, not mine. The Renaissance thinker Leonardo Bruni made a very compelling argument that, contrary to how corporate shills are constantly screaming that the world doesn't owe you anything, society does actually owe us. This is because society itself is man-made and not artificial. It's not something that just randomly fell out of the sky. It exists because and only because our ancestors built it specifically for us to enjoy a better life. It's not some random divine structure that appeared out of nowhere. It was built by people for the specific purpose of serving people, and thus it does inherently owe us. This is also why human life has inherent value. The human capacity to plan, reason, and imagine is what allowed our ancestors to build the society and is what makes our lives fundamentally different and more valuable than that of animals. Think of it this way. The general thought process for most of society is that your parents owe you at least up to a certain age because they chose to bring you into this world, but society at large doesn't. But this is objectively false. Society did, in fact, ask you to be born as well. Just look at how every developed country is now begging its citizens to have more kids. This is the literal definition of asking you to be born. So society asking you to be born, then claiming it doesn't owe you anything after the fact is literally the most spoiled and entitled lack of responsibility mindset ever. It's no different than if a parent were to abandon their kid at birth, which is a literal crime. So, no, Gen Z isn't entitled for thinking our lives do have inherent value and society does owe us. Delusional boomers and corporate shills are the biggest simps with no self-respect ever for thinking that our lives are inherently worthless. All of us, no matter your skin color or where you're from, had ancestors in our bloodline that directly contributed to building this advanced modern society we all live in today. And thus, we are entitled, yes, entitled to reap the benefits of it. No more than a rich kid who doesn't want to work isn't considered entitled or a burden for inheriting his parents' wealth. The rest of us who don't want to work are not entitled either for inheriting a society that all of our ancestors had a hand in building. This exposes another stupid, delusional double standard these corporate shills have. They don't necessarily have a problem with people not working. They have a problem with poor people not working. When a rich kid inherits his parents' trust fund and chooses not to work, literally no one bats an eye. But when poor people don't want to work and just peacefully exist in a society that their ancestors built, suddenly being unemployed is a massive scandal and a horrible sin. We all had ancestors that built this society, and they specifically built it for us. If these corporate simps want to complain that Gen Z being unemployed is a burden to society, then guess what? None of us asked to or consented to being born. And when we were in non-existence, we didn't need any resources from society at all. But as we covered earlier, society did, in fact, ask you to be born. And without your permission, forced you into this life where you need resources to survive. So it has no right to complain about you being a burden when this is a burden that they specifically asked for and requested for that they didn't have to. So once again, Gen Z isn't spoiled or entitled for not wanting to work. In fact, Gen Z standing up and telling the world that you're not entitled to our labor is the biggest act of self-respect ever that we have all lost over the course of centuries of corporate brainwashing. It's actually the delusional boomer mindset that your life has no inherent value outside of work that's the most gigasimp slave mentality ever, with absolute zero self-respect and dignity. And hey, if you want to be a corporate simp with no self-respect, go right ahead. No one's stopping you. But stop calling the younger generation lazy and entitled because they have the self-respect to stand up for themselves that you never did. Hey guys, just wanted to say thank you all so much for this incredibly rapidly growing community we're building here. If you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of delusional corporate shills. Part 2. Free market capitalism goes both ways. Alright, so you guys who followed me for a while know that I'm no fan of capitalism at all. But just for the context of this video segment, I'm going to be a total, unequivocal free market capitalist. Because these corporate simps have successfully brainwashed us for so long that our lives have no inherent value outside of how much shareholder profits we can generate, it took away any and all of our free market rights to negotiate for fair wages and better, more dignified working conditions. I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not anti-work or against working by any means. If any of you out there want to go out, hustle, work hard, and make a bunch of money, please go right ahead. I promise you, I will not stop you. In fact, I very much encourage you to do so. Just be aware of what you're getting yourself into with how bad the economy is for young people now. That's all. I view work the same way I view religion. If you want to believe in God, I totally respect that. But stop trying to force everyone else to believe in your religion too. It's the same way with work. If you want to work, go right ahead. But stop shaming, demonizing, and forcing everyone else to work too. This is also why I don't buy this idea that if we had a universal basic income or some way to guarantee basic living expenses for everyone, people would magically stop working and society would collapse. A UBI would only guarantee basic living necessities, not luxuries. So the idea that people only want basic food and shelter and won't work for luxuries like nice houses, cars, vacations, clothes, electronics, and more is just silly. And this isn't just my opinion now either. We now have official studies and data to back this up. An official 3-year UBI study in Germany just concluded, and the report specifically states that one of the key findings of the 3-year experiment is that people who received the basic income kept working an average of 40 hours a week, dispelling the myth that basic income would make people lazy. However, a significantly higher percentage of the participants in the basic income group changed jobs compared to the control group, knowing they had a financial backup plan presumably helped them make the move. It was also found that more people in the basic income group started studying, sometimes on top of their job. Not only did people not stop working, they significantly improved their jobs and their quality of work. This echoes something I've been saying for a long time, which is that a true free market can't exist without guaranteeing everyone's basic living necessities first. Let's say you're a young person, fresh out of high school or college looking for your first job. Your parents aren't willing to support you and you're going to be homeless and starve to death if you don't find a job fast. After 700 job applications, you finally get an interview where the boss tells you that he'll give you a job, but only if you suck his ass, kiss his feet, and call him master 7 times per day. Do you really have any free market ability to say no? With the threat of homelessness and starvation over your head, there is no free market because one side has the leverage of ending your livelihood if you say no. It's like robbing a bank, but saying the bank teller technically has free will because he could just choose to get shot in the head instead of handing over the money. Working and being productive is a good thing, but only if it's optional and not forced. Only if we willingly choose to do it and are given free market incentive to do it instead of being forced to do it. Being forced to do it is slavery. And this isn't just my opinion anymore. Official studies, hard evidence, and empirical data have now confirmed this now, as you just saw. But this all circles back to the delusional corporate shill logic that our lives have no inherent value. If your life has no inherent value, you have absolutely no self-respect or dignity. You have to suck up, kiss ass, and be a good slave to your corporate slave master, no matter how horrible and degrading he is. But if your life does have inherent value and you have any level of self-respect, then you deserve better. Gen Z is retaking control of the narrative around this. And as a millennial, I just have to say, about freaking time somebody finally did. What I've noticed in all my time making Gen Z videos so far is that a lot of Gen Z actually does want to work. They just don't want to work for humiliating dogshit wages and working conditions these corporate slave masters are trying to force them into. They're saying, I will work, but only for the right price and the right conditions. Because guess what? Unlike the corporate simps of past generations, they have self-respect and dignity. Again, free market capitalism goes both ways. If I want to buy a video game, I have to be able to afford and pay for the game. If I feel like it costs too much, I can either accept it and pay it anyways, or decide that it's not worth it. But one thing I can't do is shame the game company for being lazy or entitled, for not wanting to sell me the game for cheaper. And it's the same with labor. If these modern day corporate slave masters don't want to pay higher wages and offer better incentives for working, then they can either deal with it or accept the fact that no one will want to work for them. But shaming a whole generation for not wanting to work for their dogshit wages is peak entitlement and hypocrisy. Gen Z is holding them to their own standards and their own logic, and we should all support them for this. Part 3. Entitlement/complaining is progress. Lazy, spoiled, whiny, arrogant, and entitled. These are labels Gen Z has been nonstop bombarded with from delusional boomers and their corporate simps. We see this in the comments all the time too. Oh, you're just whining, bro. You're just complaining. You're just lazy and entitled. There's a great book I read called The Lazy Way to Success from Fred Gatson that really puts these labels in a new perspective. Gatson makes the case that every technological advancement in human history was inspired by laziness. Chairs were invented because people were too lazy to stand up all the time. Cars were invented because people were too lazy to walk everywhere. Airplanes were invented because people were too lazy to sail for months on end just to travel the world. And AI is being invented as we speak because people are too lazy to look up all that information themselves. This is all 100% factual and true. It's what's actually happening in front of our eyes. And let's talk about what led up to that inspiration. Gen Z is constantly being labeled as just complaining all the time, but this is exactly the type of self-respect humanity needed in order to progress human civilization. Think about it. Why were cars invented? Because someone at some point complained that it was too tedious to walk around everywhere. Why were computers invented? Because somebody at some point complained that it's too hard to do all these calculations in our heads alone. Why did every entrepreneur take the risk to start his own company? Because at some point, he complained that he was tired of his own soulless, meaningless 9-to-5 wage slave job. When economic conditions are as objectively bad as they are now, complaining isn't wrong. In fact, it's the ultimate form of self-respect. You can't solve a problem unless you can clearly call out what it is in the first place and hold people accountable for it. It's standing up to your bullies and demanding that this world, this society that did in fact ask you to be born, take responsibility to serve the people who created it. And this is why Gen Z being unemployed isn't lazy or entitled. It is in fact the ultimate form of self-respect. Now remember how earlier in the video we mentioned how some of the greatest Renaissance thinkers and philosophers ever agree with Gen Z? We recently made another video doing a full historical breakdown on how modern day Gen Z and some of the greatest Renaissance thinkers ever view the world in a shockingly similar way. You can check it out right here. I'll see you there. Thank you guys so much for watching.